Hey, I want to say a little bit about predictive coding and about FabricPC, which is the new software framework that we're launching from our AGI R&D team at Singularity.net. So, as you probably know, if you've been following my AI work for a while, I'm not a big believer that scaling up current formal neural networks like the LLMs we have inside ChatGPT and such is the path to AGI. I mean, of course, in a sense, the brain runs on neurons, astrocytes, glia, and other such cells, along with a bunch of funky electrochemistry. So, I mean, if you gave a detailed enough simulation of the neurons and other cells in the brain, yes, you can make a human level AGI that way. Might not be the right kind of AGI for optimal uplift to superintelligence, but it would be very, very interesting, right? And I mean, that kind of R&D is important. The so-called neurons inside current AI neural net models are very, very simplified mathematical entities, sort of inspired by actual events in the brain, right? Rather than being actual biological neural models. That's fine. They've done some very cool things. I think they're also missing some of the aspects of the brain that make the brain more AGI capable, or rather more biological general intelligence capable. It's interesting also to take the kinds of formal neural nets used in computer science and nudge them closer and closer to how biology works. I mean, this isn't, in my view, necessary for getting to AGI. Like the Hyperon design, I think, could produce an AGI just based on, mathematical models of the mind, of various aspects of cognition and complex system science, without worrying too much about exactly how the brain works. I mean, just like, we're going to be able to build drones that fly better than birds without trying to emulate bird physiology within probably a decade, right? Right now, there's pluses and minuses between our mechanical flying machines and how birds fly. That said, it can also be super interesting to take systems like Hyperon and hybridize them with systems that nudge current computer science neural net models further in the direction of how brains work, right? And this is especially interesting when making a neural model more brain-like, also makes it better fulfill mathematical principles of general intelligence, so that you're not just making things more biological, you're moving further and further from standard neural net models toward things fulfilling fundamental principles of learning, reasoning, self-understanding, cognition, right? So one example of this that's really interesting is predictive coding and associated ideas in the domain of active inference. There's new ideas in this domain like causal coding that I made up last year at our Hyperon workshop in October. Predictive coding, it's based on the idea that neurons or neural modules in the brain often are trying to predict what other neurons or neural modules in the brain are doing. And, this kind of tops out at some neurons trying to predict what's going to come in through a sensor, or predict what impact and action in the world is going to have. And then internally, like a neuron's trying to predict what the eye's going to see, a neuron's trying to predict what the arm's going to do in the world. And then other neurons are trying to predict what those sensory and motor predictive neurons are going to do. Other neurons are trying to predict what other neurons are going to predict the sensory or motor predictions are going to do, and so forth. So you're going to have these chains of prediction, or in the case of causal coding, a neuron trying to estimate how much it will cause something that's going to happen in the world, another neuron predicting how much it's going to cause that neuron to cause that neuron to cause that neuron to cause that neuron to cause something in the world, right? So this sort of neural network is very interesting in that it's more similar to how the brain works than neural nets learning according to the backpropagation algorithm, which is sort of the workhorse learning algorithm of most commercial neural networks do. It's more biological, and it's manifesting a sort of interesting fundamental principle of recursively nested prediction and self-organizing networks of interpredicting nodes, right? And it also has some favorable practical computational properties compared to the backpropagation learning mechanism which underlies most commercial neural nets today. One of which is learning in predictive coding and similar networks tends to be localized, like each neuron is doing its own learning, kind of asynchronously and loosely coupled with the learning that the other neurons are doing. So backpropagation, also a very cool algorithm, right? But the way it works, like you have a hierarchical neural net, the output layer is trying to do something. It gets an error signal telling it how much it messed up. There's some math that lets you propagate the error back to the next layer down. So like if this output neuron messed up by this much, all these output neurons messed up by certain amounts, and how much of the neurons in the next layer down mess up. Then when you see how much they messed up, then you can infer how much neurons in the next layer down would have messed up. And this was a cool idea. I mean, I loved teaching this when I used to teach neural nets in the 90s in university. But the way it works, you sort of have to sweep down through the network as a whole, step by step, back propagating these errors. It's not hard to code. It's a very orderly process, but it's sort of too orderly of a process. Like the brain is more of a big, messy, self-organizing process where different neurons and links in the brain are learning independently from the other neurons and links in the brain, and then they're all kind of coordinating their learning together in a loose, fluid, self-organizing way, right? So, and the brain is massively parallel, like each neuron is doing its own thing with its own physiological resources, kind of without any close synchronization with the other neurons, just sort of loosely working together. And every now and then you have some close phase synchronization when things need to be closely coordinated, right? And the need for backpropagation to proceed sort of in lockstep through a whole neural network, layer by layer, this ties in with why hyperscaler server farms are needed now for training large language models, right? So if you manage to train large neural networks, like large language models are similar, using predictive coding are similar, I mean, then you would have something you could train in more of an open and more of a decentralized way, which means you don't need a big hyperscaler server farm anymore, right? Like you could train a predictive coding neural network on a bunch of phones using NuNet protocol, or a bunch of weak computers, or a bunch of server farms that are big and powerful, but just not like as big and powerful as a hyperscaler, right? So this would obviously give a lot of practical benefit and would completely change the hardware landscape, right? So and change the geopolitical landscape and the AI safety landscape, right? Because so many people in planning their national or corporate AI strategies are figuring out, like, how would you protect against AI going awry? Or what's the big danger of AI going awry? People are assuming that the best AI in the world will need to be trained on these huge hyperscaler server farms, but it's not necessarily going to be the case if we can upgrade neural nets to get them off of backprop onto predictive coding. And there's reasons besides decentralization and being more biological and more cognitively principled to try to make the shift from backprop to predictive coding or similar methods. I mean, continual learning is another big reason, right? I mean, backprop networks, they suffer what's called catastrophic forgetting, where after you've trained a backprop network with a certain amount of knowledge, if you try to put any more knowledge in, it starts to rapidly forget so much of what it learned before. And that's, I mean, this is, in essence, like, this is the reason why we take a neural model, train it to a certain point, and then we freeze it, right? We say like, here's a model like 5.5 Pro or something, and then that model is frozen, and that's it, and you don't train it anymore. You just do inference with it. So we're used to that now with commercial neural net models, but it's actually not, like, it's not the way it has to be, right? This is just because backpropagation can't just keep learning and learning and learning like a biological neural net would. A predictive coding network, in theory, should be able to. Hold on, I have to pay a toll.
Hey.
Yeah, Vashon.
3430. When you pull forward, they're going to tell you what lane.
All right.
You're all set. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Which lane for Vashon?
Cross W, exit lane A.
All right. Recording videos while driving is perfectly safe. Don't worry about it. Don't take my driver's license, please. I need it. Yeah, so there's evidence from research papers that backpropagation can be superseded greatly by predictive coding for continual learning. But we haven't shown it at scale, right? And we haven't shown it that well for even smaller transformers. It's shown more for smaller size deep neural nets, doing vision processing, doing different sorts of tasks. So there's research here, right? Like, we know what predictive coding is capable of in terms of continual learning and higher accuracy. Other advantages, like often you can train it based on less data than a backprop network would take, or noisier data, or it can survive better when parts of the network are damaged. We've shown a whole bunch of cool advantages of predictive coding networks at the smaller scale, but we need to show they work at a larger scale. We need to show they work for a fuller spectrum of neural models, like transformer neural networks. And I mean, I'm quite confident it will work. There's going to be various adjustments you need to make to the models to get them to work. Coding models are very helpful at doing this sort of experimentation, but at this point, human intuition is still required as well. And doing all this experimentation is easier if you have the right software framework to work within, right? So people who work with backprop neural nets will be familiar with frameworks like Torch or TensorFlow, which let you write pretty simple Python scripts for dealing with deep neural nets, and then let you quite efficiently do training or inference with these networks on GPUs, right? And you can, of course, do predictive coding or all sorts of other AI methods on Torch and TensorFlow as well, but they're especially nice for backprop-based neural networks, and they've been honed for that by now. And by now, even deeper down in the stack, like the way processing and memory are managed inside the CUDA code, like inside and in the actual hardware design of the NVIDIA chips, like all this is fitted to some extent to backpropagation, right? And I mean, we can't redo all that for predictive coding yet, though. I mean, before long we certainly can. It doesn't require a total, rebuild of the whole hardware stack. It requires some moderate adjustments. But what we can do now is we can make more appropriate software frameworks, right? So, I mean, what one thing we can do is we can make software frameworks that do it's interesting. We can create a software framework that helps with predictive coding in a directly customized way, right? And this is FabricPC. Now this was really the brainchild of our developer Matthew Berend, who worked previously at Microsoft on the Bing team, doing a lot of actually quite cool AI stuff there, and had a number of other interesting applied AI gigs before that. So we brought on Matthew into SingularityNet's AI team to help drive predictive coding research further. But he after doing a bit of research in the area, he realized, we needed more professional grade tools to work with, and we were working with NGC Learn from Alex Zabarbia's group at RIT, which is awesome. It's a great toolkit, but it's very, very flexible, and you can construct biologically realistic neurons with different kinds of ion channels and so forth, right? And I mean, this is exactly what you need for certain sorts of research. On the other hand, if you want to experiment with taking predictive coding neural models and trying to get them to really work well for practical tasks, and then scaling them up to industrial scale, so you can make a GPT-5 scale model using predictive coding, or even take a GPT-5 scale open model and train a 20 billion parameter residual layer on top of it. If you want to do stuff like this, you don't want a sort of computational neuroscience software framework like Aurobia's wonderful NGC Learn. You want something which has more of the favorable characteristics of a toolkit like Torch or TensorFlow or JAX or something, which is customized for the needs of predictive coding. And that's FabricPC, right? And so we've been working with that internally. We've been doing FabricPC hackathons, and it does let you pretty quickly get to reasonably robust predictive coding scripts compared to just rolling your own, or compared to using Torch or TensorFlow or JAX or something, right? So it's working out for our own developers and for others that we've pulled into hackathons. And now I'm psyched that we are launching it officially for the public. I mean, it's been out there as open source code already, but I think this should be very helpful. And there's of course a bunch more steps to go. So I mean, we're now using FabricPC to boil predictive coding neural operations into standard GPU operations. There's something I'm working on where I want to take a predictive and causal coding neural net and run it inside Mork, which is part of the HyperARM framework. So now we're talking about how do you integrate FabricPC with Mork for cases where you're doing predictive causal coding and stuff on Mork, right? So there's a bunch more steps to take, and I'm always got one foot in the future, but at least the version we have now is already extremely useful and is really the first thing of its kind, the first framework to sort of bridge the gap between the academic research world of predictive coding and the world of scalable commercial software. So try it out, whip up some PC neural nets with FabricPC for fun and profit and contribution toward the beneficial singularity.